This photo, solemnly provided by the Philippine Coast Guard, clearly shows the damage to the Philippine Coast Guard ship MRRV 4411 after colliding with a Chinese Coast Guard ship in the disputed Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea on August 19, 2024. In recent days, China and the Philippines have unfortunately had another friction incident in the Shenbin Reef area in the South China Sea. After the intense collision between the Coast Guard ships of the two countries, both sides have blamed each other. At the same time, on Monday this week, Chinese President Xi Jinping received the visit of Vietnamese President Vien Thanh in a very high-profile way in Beijing. Against this background, people can't help but ask, what exactly are the differences in China's policies on the South China Sea? On Monday this week, Chinese Coast Guard ships collided with two Philippine Coast Guard ships in the area of Shenbin Reef in the Nansha Islands, which the Philippines calls Second Thomas Shoal. This incident has once again sharply escalated the friction between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea. The U.S. State Department quickly issued a statement on the same day, strongly condemning the so-called dangerous behavior of the Chinese side and reiterating its security commitment to the Philippines. The statement clearly pointed out, Chinese ships deliberately collided with two Philippine Coast Guard ships through reckless operations, resulting in structural damage to the Philippine ships and endangering the safety of personnel on board. This is undoubtedly the latest example of China forcibly implementing its illegal South China Sea claims in the South China Sea and using dangerous escalation means. The United States strongly calls on China to abide by international law and stop its dangerous and destabilizing behavior. At the same time, the statement also emphasized that any attack on Philippine military forces, ships or aircraft will trigger the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty in response to the above statement by the U.S. side. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning gave a powerful response at the regular press conference. On Tuesday, Mao Ning said that the fact is that the Philippines violated China's rights first, and China only took rights protection measures in accordance with the law. She also sternly demanded that the United States not get involved in the South China Sea issue. Mao Ning emphasized, the United States is not a party to the South China Sea issue and has no right to get involved in the maritime issues between China and the Philippines. Moreover, it must not use the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty as an excuse to violate China's sovereignty and rights and interests in the South China Sea. The United States should stop provoking confrontation in the South China Sea and no longer undermine regional stability and exacerbate tensions. In fact, many people have doubts. The 9-dash line in the South China Sea was not delineated by the United States accompanying China as some people thought. The 9-dash line in the South China Sea is delineated by China based on historical and legal bases such as the earliest discovery, earliest naming, earliest development and operation, and earliest continuous jurisdiction of the South China Sea Islands in the course of historical development. The United States is now going back on its word, which is entirely out of its own hegemonic thinking and geopolitical considerations. The Philippines has been in a state of colonization for a long time in history, when it was not yet an independent country. The South China Sea Islands had already been an inalienable part of China's territory. The sovereignty of the South China Sea has a clear historical context and a solid legal basis, and it is by no means something that some countries with ulterior motives can distort and violate at will. On the collision between Chinese and Philippine Coast Guard vessels at Sabina Shoal, the China Coast Guard clearly stated that the Philippine side trespassed into the sea area without China's permission. The China Coast Guard further stated that China has always taken control measures in accordance with the law. However, the Philippine side ignored China's warnings and deliberately collided with Chinese vessels in an unprofessional and dangerous way. The responsibility for this collision incident lies entirely with the Philippine side. The Philippine National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea categorically denied the above statements by the Chinese side. The Philippine side claimed that, at that time, the country's Coast Guard vessel was on its way to Flat Island and in Anshan Island to provide supplies to the Philippine personnel stationed on the islands. But after encountering Chinese vessels on the way, Chinese vessels carried out aggressive navigation operations and a collision occurred, resulting in holes and structural damage to the Philippine vessel at the end of July this year. China and the Philippines just held consultations on Ren'ai, a disputed island in the South China Sea, and reached a temporary arrangement. The two sides agreed to manage differences through dialogue and avoid the continuous escalation of conflicts. However, soon after, frictions between the two countries at Scarborough Shoal arose again. This situation cannot help but make the outside world confused about China's policy in the South China Sea. Elizabeth Freund-Laras, a non-resident senior fellow at the Global China Center of the Atlantic Council's think tank in Washington, pointed out that the conflict between China and the Philippines at Scarborough Shoal fully highlights that the aforementioned temporary arrangement only coordinated the frictions between the two countries around Ren'ai, but failed to fundamentally resolve the dispute over control rights in the South China Sea. She believes that such local coordinated arrangements are difficult to comprehensively resolve the complex geopolitical contradictions in the South China Sea. The disputes between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea still face many challenges. At the same time, this incident has also aroused the concern of the international community about the future direction of the situation in the South China Sea. All parties are closely watching how China and the Philippines will further handle this tense situation and what role the international community can play in it. The disputes in the South China Sea still have not been properly resolved to this day. All along, China has always firmly advocated having indisputable control and sovereignty within the 10-dash line in the South China Sea, and there has never been any sign of giving up such a clear declaration. In this case, due to the improper behavior of some countries, China will naturally have collisions with the ships of other countries in the South China Sea, whether it is the Philippines, Vietnam or some other countries with ulterior motives. Take the Philippines as an example. At present, the Philippines is seeking a so-called exclusive economic zone within China's territorial waters. This is undoubtedly a wrong act. It is precisely because of this that China and the Philippines often collide in sea areas where the Philippines should not claim sovereignty, such as Ren'ai, Scarborough Shoal and other areas. At the same time, Chinese President Xi Jinping and the newly appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, Su Lin, had an important meeting in Beijing on Monday. According to the detailed report by China's official media Xinhua news agency, Xi Jinping pointed out to Su Lin during the talks that after Su Lin took office as the General Secretary, his first overseas visit was to China. This important move fully highlights the high degree of importance the Vietnamese side attaches to the relations between the two parties and the two countries, and also vividly reflects the high level and strategic significance of China-Vietnam relations in the future development process. The two countries should continuously deepen friendship and jointly work hard to build a China-Vietnam community with a shared future. However, there are voices of doubt from the outside world. Vietnam and the Philippines are both countries around the South China Sea. Why does the Beijing authorities show a friendly attitude towards Vietnam, but take a tough attitude towards the Philippines? In this regard, I believe that China has full confidence to draw Vietnam closer in the context of this China competition. Therefore, the Beijing authorities will adopt a relatively restrained attitude towards Vietnam on the South China Sea issue. China deeply realizes that it can prevent Vietnam from closely allying with the United States through positive efforts. This well explains why China is more restrained towards Vietnam compared to the Philippines. On the other hand, The Philippines is a treaty ally of the United States. Under the current international situation, this identity of the Philippines has made it the focus of China's attention in recent years. China wants to show through practical actions that the United States is an unreliable partner and that it cannot even protect its oldest ally in Asia, so that some countries can recognize the reality and make the right choices. In addition, there is another possible situation. One important reason for China to show courtesy to Vietnam is that the two countries share a similar communist ideology. China and Vietnam have had many exchanges and cooperation in the historical process. This common ideological foundation enables the two sides to have in-depth understanding and interaction in many fields, and also makes the relations between the two countries closer to some extent, like brothers. However, when facing the Philippines, China presents a different posture. The Philippines has a different political system from Vietnam. In the Philippines, the political landscape is relatively complex. Moreover, China believes that behind the series of actions of the Philippines in the South China Sea, it is obviously instigated by the United States. For China, the actions of the Philippines in the South China Sea have brought certain challenges to regional stability, and China regards it as a trouble. However, what is more worthy of attention is that there is a bigger trouble behind the Philippines: the United States. The frequent intervention and provocation of the United States in the South China Sea makes the situation more tense and complex when facing international criticism. China still firmly adheres to its claim of sovereignty over the South China Sea. This is a legitimate claim based on history, legal principles and norms of international relations. China is well aware that the South China Sea islands and their adjacent waters are an inalienable part of China's territory. Maintaining national territorial integrity and maritime rights and interests is the core interest of every country. Therefore, on the whole, if any neighboring country has sovereignty friction related to China, China will never back down. As long as a country challenges China's sovereignty claim, China will definitely take corresponding countermeasures. This is a sovereignty issue involving national core interests. No country will back down on such a principled issue. At the same time, China deploys Coast Guard vessels to safeguard national maritime rights and interests. This approach has many positive meanings. On the one hand, China can claim that it is protecting its territorial waters, showing China's firm determination to safeguard national sovereignty and maritime rights and interests. On the other hand, compared with dispatching the Navy, the deployment of Coast Guard vessels is not so aggressive. This not only reflects China's restraint and rationality in handling the South China Sea issue, but also shows China's positive attitude of being committed to resolving disputes through peaceful means. Such a practice is indeed a very clever operation. It can not only effectively safeguard national interest but also avoid further escalation of the situation to a certain extent.